visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth. I think all of us are at fault, and I think it's just it's long overdue that something be done about it.
Bernard is my best friend. He's my brother. He's my talisman. He's my, I look to him and I see the possibility of humanity. I see optimism. In the days when we met, the other residents, they would have a life expectancy 25 years, 30 years. Bernard he went on to have a career in advocacy. He's become such a symbol of the possibilities, and also an indictment of all the lives and human potential wasted by that institutional approach to caring for the developmentally disabled.
I met you at Bill Bronx's house.
At his house?
Yeah.
On Staten Island?
That's where you did an interview.
How long have you been at Willowbrook?
18 years.
How long were you given physical therapy in school?
5 years. We started talking, and that's how we became good friends over 50 years.
Did I take you back into Willowbrook?
I never went back.
You never went back, yeah. I wish that I never did.
It's been more than 6 years since Robert Kennedy walked out of one of the wards here at Willowbrook and told newsmen of the horror he'd seen inside.
I was working as a kind of a street lawyer representing activist groups like the Young Lords, and I met Dr. Wilkins and Dr. Bronston during a period of great disruption in East Harlem. They were volunteer doctors helping the kids. Mike called me at one point and said that he had just been fired from Willowbrook, and I said, "What's Willowbrook?" It sounded so nice, that lyrical name, the Willowbrook. I thought it was like a country club. He said he had just been fired and that the conditions there were so appalling that he thought it would be a great story for us to tell. And I listened. I had no experience at all with either institutions or with the developmentally disabled, so I was utterly unprepared for the reality of Willowbrook.
There was one attendant for perhaps 50 severely and profoundly retarded children. Lying on the floor, naked and smeared with their own feces, they were making a pitiful sound, a kind of mournful wail that it's impossible for me to forget. This is what it looked like, this is what it sounded like, but how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death. How is it living on the ward that you live?
Disgrace.
Is it disgrace?
Yes.
Why?
The conditions are getting worse every time they cut the budget more and more.
The attendants are trying their best, but the staff is just too small to do anything more than just try and keep the place clean. When there's only one person to take care of 30 or 40, nothing good can possibly happen. No rehabilitation, no training, nothing. The attendants are as much the victim of the conditions here as the patients are.
When I applied for my job, I was really never taken to any of the wards. They just accepted my application and they told me when I would start. And then I went to Building 6, which was my building. And the building supervisor opened the door to the day room, and there was the chaos.
This was a secret enclave. The system had set up a way that would not allow any ordinary people to see what was going on inside these brick buildings. You have no idea what was inside, no idea the savagery, the squalor, the illness, the infectiousness, the violence that was just the norm every day.
It had a stink to it that got into your clothes and into your skin. How unattended, it was hell on earth.
Why would you continue to allow people to share bathrooms with no doors on the stalls when you know 100% of them get hepatitis within 6 months of entering, and when the incidence of intestinal parasites and worms was incredibly high?
But they used to give out cookies and candy. They used to throw it on the floor, and they all get down and grab it. I mean, and I never told nobody that. It happened. It happened.
Had a stink to it that got into your clothes and into your skin. How unattended. It was hell on earth. It was really. I mean, I was an experienced person, but when I saw Willowbrook, it was something that seared my soul.
Well, Willowbrook has a long history, obviously, on this site. It actually was first chartered 75 years ago. And in the charter, it was described as a school for the education of what they then termed mental defectives. What we now would say probably would be people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So it started out with this goal of educating and training people, and much of the coverage that you might see in the newspapers then was designed to encourage people to see this as a good option for their children. But very quickly, through underfunding and understaffing, it became really quite unlivable. At its height, it had about 3 times as many people living in its wards as the place was designed to accommodate.
I would get calls, for example, at the beginning that say to me, somebody's acting out. You need to sign straitjacket order. You need to sign a Thorazine shot to cool them down. And I didn't understand what was going on here at first. Really, it took me a year to really see and figure out the evil, the relentless cruelty that was built into this system to maintain the status quo.
Lack of privacy, and that many of the people were, at that time, because of the budget cuts, there weren't enough changes of clothing to go around, so there was nudity, chaos.
Nobody came into these buildings. Not the director of this place, nobody came into those buildings. They were sealed off, as coffins. They were living coffins for devalued people.
Before Geraldo Rivera's expose, there was a young reporter, Jane Curtin, who went to Willowbrook and actually did a series of articles exposing the conditions. She was joined by Eric Artz, who was a photojournalist who took some powerful photographs of the horrific conditions there. So Jane really was the first to really bring public awareness to what was happening at Willowbrook.
I got to know then Mike Wilkins and Bill Bronston. They contacted me and told me that there was something that I should see, that they thought that I would be able to write about it. They had faith, I think, in my perspective on things. They walked me through the front door. I mean, I was with people who were taking chances, but there had been no prior exposure, so there were no alarm bells. So it was just 3 people going through the front door.
Nobody really believed it. When Jane Curtin did her articles in the Staten Island Advance, there were a couple of still photos, but still nobody believed it, and we were being denounced from pulpits and other politicians not believing us, and they were thinking we were just radicals bad-mouthing an institution that was doing its best.
The first thing I began to do was to bring the families inside to show them why their kids were being destroyed, why every time they come, their kid would be more and more damaged, more and more injured.
Bill Bronston and I quickly observed and concluded that the most progressive element in that institution was the parents.
That led to meetings where I began to set up seminars for the families in order to understand why they had to get their kids out of here.
The parents got involved, they got organized, they got confident because their meetings were really big. We had a meeting of one Sunday with a large group of parents. The director, Dr. Jack Hammond, was invited. He was asked to take a public stand against the conditions where there weren't enough clothes, there wasn't enough staff. He refused. He said, I've been in this business for a long time and it won't work. They ejected him from the meeting at that point. That was a Sunday, and that following Monday, there was a memorandum circulated through the institution saying that no employee was allowed to attend a meeting of the parents' organization. But the next Sunday, I did attend, and so did Bill. And then we were promptly given our pink slips.
The supervisor in Building 6, a nice guy, but it was his job to hand me my pink slip and tell me I was fired, and I was pretty stunned. And his hand was shaking, and in his anxiety, he forgot to ask for the key. And I didn't remember that I had it. So I got home, and there it was. And so, of course, it made me think, because one of my thoughts was, man, if people just knew, if they just knew about this place and could see it for themselves, nobody would put up with it. And so I slept on it, and the next day I called Geraldo. I happen to know him from before.
Well, Mike called me at one point and said that he had just been fired from Willowbrook. And I said, what's Willowbrook? It sounded so nice, that lyrical name, the Willowbrook. I thought it was like a country club. He said he had just been fired and that the conditions there were so appalling that he thought it would be a great story for us to tell. And I listened. I had no experience at all with either institutions or with the developmentally disabled. So I was utterly unprepared for the reality of Willowbrook. I was horrified. I was appalled. It was beyond belief how horrible it was, how filthy it was. It was hell on earth. It was really. I mean, I was an experienced person. Very urban, very savvy. Did all kinds of drug abuse stories, and I was a tough guy. But when I saw Willowbrook, it was something that seared my soul. The administrators had a colder, academic, excusing in a way as thinking that we were naive, that there was something that we were missing. And I think that my ignorance was my strength, in the sense that I looked at it and said, are you kidding me? I mean, you have children unattended and smeared with their own feces and wailing under the sinks, their pants down around their ankles, eating slop. I mean, what is it that I don't understand?
The conditions are getting worse every time they cut the budget more and more.
I got back to the Eyewitness newsroom, and there were a barrage of calls from New York State officials angrily denouncing our trespassing and threatening lawsuits, and without authorization violated the privacy of the residents.
But there's no privacy anyway.
There was no privacy anyway. Very eloquently stated. They lived, everything, all communal. So to his credit, Al Primo, the director of Eyewitness News, and the assignment editors said, okay, they suspended judgment. The film came back from the lab. They saw the film. Everyone's spine stiffened, and they said, we're going to go with this story. It changed the world.
But even Bernard, with his tragically eloquent plea for help, doesn't really understand that what Willowbrook needs isn't more money. More money would certainly help. At least the kids would have clothes and they'd be cleaner than they are now, but they'd still basically be human vegetables in a detention camp. What we need is a new approach. We have to change the way we care for our mentally retarded. We ask for change, we demand change.
The question was, what was the solution to this place? They wanted to fix it, of course. They wanted to pour another few millions of dollars into this place because they didn't have another alternative paradigm in their head. And our job was to stop them from fixing this place and to shut it down. We went into the federal court in order to try and get an emergency intervention. The lawyers brought in the top leaders in the United States to talk about what quality services for people with special needs look like. Their testimony was just amazing. It was the first time that the reality of habilitation services, of individualized developmental services was articulated in a court situation. And so as the trial went on, finally, the judge decided to get up off of his bench and come and take a look. And that closed the deal. Once he saw it, once he walked through it, no matter what they did to clean it up. And they tried to clean it up.
The expose really led to major changes in the disability system in this country, and various laws were passed which were designed to protect people with disabilities. In 1975 alone, 3 significant laws were enacted, leading up to the passage of the Civil Rights for Institutionalized Persons Act, which protects the rights of people with disabilities in institutional facilities, followed by the official closure of Willowbrook in 1987, paving the way for the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. So after Bernard left Willowbrook, he went on to become a civil rights activist for people with developmental disabilities, and really was a driving force behind the creation of the statewide Self-Advocacy Association of New York State, or SANES as it's called. So he went on to do some great things after he left Willowbrook.
I had a home walk life when I left the institution. I remember when I started taking the subway and the bus, I was scared. I mean, I had to get used to people looking at me, walking and talking, and God, I remember when I first got on the subway, I got lost. I think about people like Dr. King and the movement back in the 70s and 80s. I thought in my mind people with disability could be active in their own community and make changes, and that's how I got started.
You did pretty well.
Not make it about you, but make it about the other people that you're advocating for.
I think that's one of the great things that Bernard has done. He really has focused attention on the humanity of the disabled as something that was utterly ignored. And it was almost commodified in a sense. He has become a great man in his way. He was the first, at least in my knowledge, he was the first. He was the first one to escape and then become a public person and then bring attention to the horrors of the place where he was. And also by living independently and then having a career, he became an example of potential realized. So what are your proudest moments? You want to talk about your getting your doctor's degree?
Yes. That is my most, and the funny thing about that, I got it, and the other degree from the same place that I lived at for 18 years of my life. And that is very special to me.
Here we are, there he is. Where would he have been? Where would he have been if he never met Wilkins and Bronston? He get pneumonia because someone's shoving crap down his mouth, the way so many of them died then. We have some abuse in the ward there. Where would he have been? It's instead he became a symbol of a potential realized. We go back, it seems to me, we went back for the 10-year and the 25th year and the 50th, but I am very, very heartened by the fact that that nightmare has become such a positive example of what's possible now.
For millions of Americans with disabilities like me, Medicaid means freedom. In 1972, I escaped the Willowbrook State School. There, I experienced torture and abuse alongside thousands of other people with disabilities. Though I'm best known for fighting my way out of there, I'm even more proud of the life I've lived since then. I have lived in my own apartment. I founded a statewide non-for-profit run by advocates with disabilities, and I worked for 37 years for the state of New York, helping to make the lives of people like me better. By the time I ended my career as a state employee, I was proud to have saved up for my retirement. For me, this was an important accomplishment. Unfortunately, I was never paid for my years of child labor at Willowbrook. 75 years old now, and my cerebral palsy has been getting worse as I've gotten older. Each day, I'm able to do a little bit less than the day before. It's a slow, scary process. Sometimes I think about how fortunate I was to get my freedom from Willowbrook, only to now watch it gradually slip away. About a year ago, I realized I had fallen into a trap all too familiar for people with disabilities. I had too little money for the supports I would likely need to keep me living in the community as I age. At the same time, I had too much to qualify for programs like Medicaid that can get me the in-home assistance I will need, and that other programs like Medicare don't cover. So I decided to spend down my hard-earned savings. Proud as I was of what I had earned, I knew that sooner or later I would have to throw it all away in order to survive. I've nearly reached my goal. I'm on the cusp of qualifying for Medicaid. But now Congress is threatening to snatch it away from me. Congress's current plan to gut Medicaid to help pay for billionaire tax cuts makes me feel like everything I've worked for, saved for, and now thrown away has been just to provide a big benefit check to the 1%ers. Worse still, what this means is that Congress is putting a price on my freedom and the freedom of millions of other older adults and persons with disabilities. Yes, over time, the kinds of in-home assistance I rely on to take care of my personal needs, for example, will cost something, though not so much that Jeff Bezos would miss it. But every day I wake up to read the news and brace myself for details about how politicians, most of whom know little about escaping an institution and now aging with disability. All I hear is politicians planning to make sure they don't pay too much to keep me in the community and out of the kind of institution I grew up in. Our politicians talk a lot about freedom, but whose freedom? I don't think the ones planning to slash Medicaid are talking about my freedom. For me, Medicaid is freedom. It's knowing where your next meal will come from. It's knowing if someone will come to help me to get out of bed and into my wheelchair. It's knowing that if I get to bathe today or not. Politicians who only talk about Medicaid as benefits or an entitlement program just don't get it. I know what it's like to lose my freedom. I lost mine when I was too young to know what it was. When I began the painful process of spending down my life savings, it was because I knew too well the price of my freedom. As it is, our country's policies make persons with disabilities impoverish themselves in order to get reliable access to a disability-related services they need to make it through the day. In other words, I knew my freedom would come at the cost of my dignity. Without Medicaid, the price of freedom for millions of older Americans and Americans with disabilities will only go up. It may mean going days or longer without food or help with dressing and bathing. It may mean relying more on neighbors, charities, and volunteer organizations to make ends meet. Finding ways to live in the community will get harder and harder. Community living for many will become community struggling, for others community dying. What many people don't realize is that Congress's plan to cut Medicaid isn't just a problem for me and people like me with disabilities, it's a problem for everyone. Medicare funds hospital services that people without disabilities rely on. Medicaid funds services for older persons that Medicare doesn't cover. Medicaid funds services that millions of parents of students with disabilities need to keep them in school. Like it or not, we're all in this together. Decades ago, when persons with disabilities like myself finally started leaving institutions in large numbers, we encountered a lot of negative attitudes from our would-be neighbors. Even as reports about the abuses that happened to people like me in institutions came to light, people already living in the community fought hard to keep us from being parts of their communities. In other words, they were putting another kind of price on our freedom. They would rather pay lawyers to go to court rather than let us live next door. We called these not in my backyard attitudes, or NIMBYism for short. Nowadays, in all the reporting about Congress's plans for Medicaid and other services that millions of Americans with disabilities rely on, I see the same old unfeeling attitude about the price of our freedom coming up in new perverse ways. Some of these politicians will continue to back their big, beautiful billionaire benefits program, but for those who care, know that we Americans with disabilities have fought like hell to get our freedom. For those who don't, we'll all too happily show you how to apply for unemployment benefits after the next election.